afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder webinar, A Whole Body Diagnosis. This afternoon, we'll be diving into the importance of physical body health for individuals with FASD. My name is Sarah Dennis, and I'll be your host this afternoon. We have over 700 attendees signed up today from Canada and all around the world, and we're really honored to have you join us. Surrey Place is committed to reconciliation with Indigenous people, and in the spirit of greater inclusion and continued allyship and respect and care for the first people of this land, we began by offering territorial land acknowledgement. Surrey Place acknowledges that Toronto is located on the traditional territory of many diverse nations. Toronto was originally home to the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and Chippewa bands. We also acknowledge that Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit today. This event is hosted by Surrey Place. Surrey Place provides specialist clinical services in the Toronto region that are responsive to individual needs and promote health and well-being. Surrey Place helps adults and children living with intellectual disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and visual impairments. We offer a variety of groups and workshops for clients, families, and caregivers, and extensive education and consultation services to community agencies. Our FASD services provide individuals, their families, and caregivers a circle of care through the support of healthcare professionals and service providers to achieve the best outcomes possible. Some general housekeeping today. So this presentation is going to be about an hour and a half long. We are not planning any intermission. There is going to be the opportunity to ask and have your questions answered. We're going to ask you, when you do submit your question, please let us know who it is directed towards. We have a variety of presenters on our panel this afternoon. We may not have time to get to every question, but we will make an effort to answer questions after the fact as well. So if your question doesn't get answered this afternoon, hopefully we will be able to give you some more information after. And lastly, this event is being recorded and will be available on our website about a week after the event. Now I'm going to turn it over to Courtney Barrow-Lawrence, a member of the webinar organizational team, who's going to introduce our presenters this afternoon.
Chi Miigwech, Sarah. To introduce myself to everyone in the land, I'm of Mi'kmaq, Mohawk, African Nova Scotian, and Acadian descent, and I'm an FASD service coordinator at Surrey Place. Thank you all for being here from your relative communities and joining us in creating more community inclusion. In just a moment, I'll introduce our keynote speaker and panel member, Myles Himmelreich. But first, today we also have with us FASD specialist, developmental pediatrician, Dr. Alvin Lowe, clinical nurse specialist, Sherry McMillan, and Kate, a parent advocate. We are now truly honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Myles Himmelreich, an international motivational speaker, trainer, consultant, peer mentor, my friend, and teacher. Myles finds his heritage rooted in the Big Stony Cree Nation in northern Alberta and has made BC his home now for many years. Myles has been an endless advocate for individuals with neurodiversities, whether that's within education, employment, children and youth and adult social and supportive services, child protection and family development, the justice system, or health. At this time, I want to invite Myles to talk more about his lived experience and research conducted by the Changemakers Advocates showing the correlation of physical health impacts due to prenatal alcohol exposure. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. So good morning, everybody. So today I want to share with you some stuff about the health survey that myself and a couple colleagues did and what the findings were and why they were so important to know about. So before we do that, I want to get a little bit of background on FASD. So when I myself growing up, I have FASD. I didn't fully understand what that meant. My parents, explained to me that, sometimes things would be harder or we might have to do things differently. Right? But I didn't really understand what the diagnosis itself meant. And so for me, I went through school, struggling with knowing and understanding what was happening and how my brain was working. And what happened was what happens a lot of times where people see an individual and they assume that the behaviors that the individual's having are bad behaviors. And then they jump straight to punishment. And this seems to be how my whole life went. Didn't matter what the environment was. When I was at home, I'd be seen as, not being a good child. And so then that was the bad behavior. And then I would be punished by being sent to my room. When I was in school, it was you didn't do your homework, you're not paying attention, whatever it was. And then the punishment was I was sent to detention. Now, when we look at how these punishments came into play, I'll give you a quick example of I tried to intervene in this fight where these two kids were, punching each other and everything, and end up throwing a rock at one of the kids to kind of scare him off. I end up hitting him in the side of the face by his eye, cutting side of his face open. The one boy gets up and runs away, and that boy gets up crying and bleeding. And then the teacher comes over and goes, "Did you throw a rock at that child?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, go to the office." And I was like, "Okay." So I go to the office, and then I get suspended and sent home. Now, this was grade 1. So this was one of the first of many, many, many hundreds of times where I was going to struggle with understanding the consequences for my actions, right? Where the consequences would happen, but not necessarily immediately. So in that circumstance, I threw the rock at the person. Then the consequence for that was me being grounded. And so I'm at home being grounded, and that all happens within an hour. When I was in school and didn't do my homework on Tuesday night, I was getting the consequences for that on Wednesday. So Tuesday at 3:30, I didn't get my homework finished, and Wednesday, 24 hours later, I'm in detention having to deal with the consequence for that. So not understanding, exactly why I was there, but I knew I was a bad kid, so I was in trouble. So then when I went to junior high, when I finished school and I was out on the streets, if I got stopped for, carrying a bag of drugs or something like that, I would get a ticket, I'd get fined, I'd have to go to court. But when you have to go to court, do you go to court in an hour? No. Do you go to court in 24 hours? No. You go to court in 3, 6, 9 months later, right? If I don't understand the consequences for my actions when they happen within an hour or they happen within 24 hours, do you think I have any chance of understanding the consequences for my actions when they happen 3, 6, 9 months later? No. All I know is I will continue to take on those labels of what I'm being seen as a kid that's not trying, that doesn't care, not paying attention, any of those things, right? And that's what I thought kind of defined who I was, was all these negative, bad behaviors with the labels on them. Right? When I started attending different conferences and learning about FASD, I started to hear different stats and things like that. And I'd be at these conferences and, I'd be hearing this is what they need. This is what, this is how they need to change. This is what they need to do. And I think, over time, I really started thinking about hearing those things. And I was like, well, is it me that needs to change? Or is it the people around me? All those years when I was sitting in detention and the teachers are walking past, looking at me going, when is he going to learn? Why didn't anyone ever stop and go, maybe we need to do something different, not him, right? So when we look at the, at FASD, one of the things I think that we need to do is change the conversation. We need to have the conversations, but we need to change them because the conversations are happening, whether we are intending for them to or not. And many times, if we're not intending to have these conversations, that's where the misinformation comes from. And that's what leads to stigma and shame and blame. People are talking about, oh, that kid down the street that's always running around and, his parents are never home or whatever. Yeah, I think he has FASD. Right? So they're talking about FASD, but not in a way that is productive, right? And so then when it's, kids getting other information I present at schools and kids in elementary school, they already, kind of label, oh, that's that kid over there. He has that, right? So it's not about, having the conversation, it's about changing the conversation. So to change the conversation, we need to get the right information. So this first slide here, how common is FASD? So in Canada, 50% of pregnancies are unplanned. 80% of Canadians consume alcohol, and 4% is affected by population is affected by FASD. I think I've heard that that's now 5%. So when we think about FASD, a lot of times the stigma and the shame and blame that comes from that is that, oh, this is, and this has been said before, an Indigenous issue. And, if the mother just didn't drink, right? I was doing a project in BC for the province and speaking with diagnostic clinics, and they were saying they were getting referrals from doctors and whoever, these professionals, but they were saying that even if there was no conversation or no idea of the mother drinking, if the child was Indigenous, they were pushed more towards an FASD assessment. If they weren't, they're directed more towards an autism assessment. So it's everywhere. It's our professionals, it's our people in the community, everything, that has some type of impact on society has an idea of what FASD is, whether that's the right idea or not, right? So if we're looking at 50% of Canadians, pregnancies are unplanned, that's a lot of people, right? So if you think about, say, that Caucasian lady, she's in her 20s, hanging out with her friends, it's summertime, and her boyfriend are playing in a softball league, and they have a couple of beers there. Then a couple weeks later, it's a birthday party, and then a wedding, and then there's the Calgary Stampede they're visiting, and by the end of the summer, she goes to the doctor to find out that she's 2 or more months pregnant. Now, does that make her a bad person? Does that mean that she intentionally harmed her child? No. Her child may or may not have FASD, and to look at the mother and go, well, you chose to do this, blah, 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 and leaving her without any supports. When that happened for my mom, what people didn't realize was by shaming and blaming her and leaving her with no supports, you then also took away supports for me. And that's where I got the label of a victim who suffers. Right? And I'm not one to believe that I'm a victim or that I suffer. I feel like there's a lot of things I've experienced in my life, but I've learned how to see and understand my diagnosis differently. When people have asked, when did you get your diagnosis? I got it as a child, but for me, I truly believe when I got my diagnosis was when I was able to understand, make sense, and becoming accepting of what FASD was, because then I could, understand, make sense, and, get to a sense of calm and you know, where things were okay for me, because now I can make sense of what was going on. So instead of just looking at all these bad behaviors, this is kind of how I started to look at FASD. So if we pull up the next slide here, we can look at the different things that can be connected when it comes to FASD. You do the next slide, please.
That's the one, Myles?
No, the next one, please. Thank you. So when we look at FASD, these are some of the things that we can look at is developmental versus chronological, right? Where the child or the individual's at developmentally, the way their brain functions, the way they see and understand things can be different than what their age is, right? And so this is something that makes it very difficult because we're pushed through school and we have these expectations on us that if you're this age, you should be doing this or that, right? And so that makes it really difficult. Abstract and concrete. Abstract are those things you can't see. Concrete, solid. So we're talking about like time and money and feelings, right? How does that look in the justice system when you're being, you know, in a trial and they're saying, well, you did this and that and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, okay. I'm not connecting the right emotions or feelings because it's not happening at that time, right? It's abstract feelings, feelings of hurt, anger, love. Those are abstract feelings, right? So that plays a big role. We talked a little bit about the cause and the effect, lying versus confabulation, putting these things together that are in your head and you honestly believe those events, right? And it's so frustrating because you believe them 100% and then, you know, your parents are like, okay, no, that didn't happen. Why are you lying? And then other kids at school are like, no, you didn't go on a safari and, you know, there's a bunch of hyenas and that's the movie Lion King. It's like, no, I did, you know, and it's like, you know, maybe I went with my uncle and we went to Africa and did a safari drive, right? Where you go and see the animals and everything. But I also maybe watched Lion King in the last week or two. So now I'm putting the two things together in my head and I 100% believe this, right? And that's where people are saying, oh, you're a liar when it's confabulating. Sensory, it's not necessarily in the diagnostic assessment for FASD, but it is something that I think is so huge and key because when you have FASD, it's not uncommon to have heightened sensory issues. When you have heightened sensory issues, things like smell, touch, noise, hearing, anything like that can actually be physically uncomfortable. So when things are loud, it's not just that they're loud, it's like it actually hurts my body. When there's certain smells that I can't handle, again, it's not just they smell, ooh, gross. It's like my body and I'm going, ouch, 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 because it physically hurts, right? So when you think about sensory issues, you think about a small child and say he's in Walmart and the speakers going off and there's the lights flickering and, you know, there's people going up and down the aisles, there's the smell of the food, all of these things happening. And that young boy is overwhelmed and he kicks a ball down the aisle and runs past you. If that boy's, say, 4 years old and he's like, ah, people look at that boy and go, oh, isn't that cute? Look at that little guy. But if you put a 19-year-old man in the same Walmart, in the same aisle, having the same sensory overload, and say, that guy runs past you swearing and yelling, how many people do you think look and go, aw, isn't he cute? No, it's, what's wrong with that guy? It's those expectations that you're an adult, you should act like an adult, you should be able to handle things. Especially when people don't understand about the sensory issues, how impactful they are, it looks like bad behavior, right? So when we look at these things, instead of looking at the bad behavior, instead of thinking, oh, he's lazy, peel that away and see that it's concrete and abstract. It's the struggle with understanding time management, right? Oh, okay, that makes more sense. Cause and effect. It's not that I don't care. I just can't connect my actions to the consequences, right? Oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense, right? So then the next one we have here, one of them that I look at is processing speed. So as we look at this next slide here, you'll see how when we break down processing speed, and I'm going to give this to you in a very short way. Usually what I do is kind of give examples of each of those things and talk about how you can explain that to somebody. But I'm just going to do this with processing because I'll connect it in a little bit here with the health stuff. So processing example, if the thing that you're supposed to do is go from point A to point B and then back again. If we see the first example with the person with the blue circle, they go from point A to point B and back again. They do a great job. Now, say they were carrying a cup of water, a small cup of water. They're able to go to the one side and come back. You look at them, you're like, good job. You obviously were listening, pay attention, you did a great job. Then the next person with their cup of water, the person with the green, they go from point A to point B. Takes them a little bit longer than the first person, but they did it. So, good job. Then the third person, it takes them a while to get from point A to point B. Maybe they lose a little bit of their water. So at the end, you're looking at them saying, okay, you gotta pay attention a little bit more and you gotta focus. You gotta be more like the first person. Look how great they are. They obviously listened and paid attention. Then the fourth example is the person that, they've got their cup of water and they got to go around the table and around and over the spinning chair and under the table and over the chairs and get to B and come back and do it all again, all the way back to point A. So now they get to point A and obviously they've lost some of that water that they had to carry in their little cup. And obviously it took them longer. So that's where you're going to get the, oh, well, you weren't listening then. You weren't paying attention. You must not try to as hard as, you should have. Right? You're getting these assumptions put on you because of what looks like the end result of bad behavior. Right? When in actuality, when we're talking about processing speed, if our brains develop differently, excuse me, if our brains develop differently, then that ability to process is going to go differently. It doesn't necessarily mean I can't do it. It might mean it's just going to take me longer, okay? Or it might be harder for me to do the information. So these things that we look at and we talk about FASD, it's still hard to, do that in a way that all of society is going to feel comfortable to talk and have the conversation. So what I've found is there's another way to have this conversation, and this is to look at FASD as a whole body diagnosis. A couple of years back, I was working with some colleagues and we were at a Vancouver conference, sitting at this table. There's about 8 of us, all of us with FASD, and I shared how I was going to get I was going in for surgery for a hernia. And I said how I've had this hernia since I was like a teenager, and now they're finally doing something. One of the other people at the table said, oh, I've had a hernia surgery, and someone else said, oh, I've had 2. I was like, hey, do you guys ever get where your knees are like just cracking? And then all of a sudden you have 8 individuals with FASD in this fancy restaurant at the hotel in Vancouver with, like 800-900 people, and we're having what we call a crack off, where it's, oh, well, if I stand, my ankles, knees, and elbows will crack. And, oh, well, I'll do this and my neck cracks. And so we're like, oh, look at this, look at that. And again, it was one of those things where you're like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one, which always feels amazing when you can find somebody else that's similar to you. So I was thinking that there's some connection here, right? That these things aren't just, oh, we just happen to have some of the same things. So we started to do this health survey. And in the health survey, we asked, move to the next slide, we asked over 260 questions in 25 areas of health, such as autoimmune cardiovascular disease. And we found that people with FASD experience these health issues anywhere from 2 to over 100 times higher than general population. So there was the three of us, myself and CJ and Emily. So if you look at us here on this next slide, you'll see that we look quote unquote normal, right? And we can present quote unquote normal. But when you see us here, we can go forward to the next one. Or next slide, please. Thank you. So look normal, expected to act normal, right? But what we ended up finding out was that each of us had anywhere 20 to 30 different health issues that we've been experiencing our whole lives. And so for me, I have hip dysplasia, scoliosis, osteoarthritis, genetic disc disease in my neck. I have perforated eardrums, just many, many different things. Okay? And what we found was that as we did this survey, it didn't seem to come as a surprise to us because we experience this all the time. But when we did the survey, we had over 500 people respond. And all these people that responded were from all over the world. We had people in Germany, the US, in New Zealand, all over. And all of them that responded were able to show their actual diagnosis that they got from the clinic, and they listed it. So we were able to go and use examples where it was individuals with a diagnosis of FASD experiencing these health issues. So what we did was we asked about different health issues in different areas, and then when we got the results back, we compared them to general population stats. So what we were finding out was that there were things like, we had 541 responses, and the important part too is to know that the average age of those people that responded was 27 and a half years old. So when we're talking about arthritis, when we're talking about dementia, when we're talking about females going through menopause, we're getting responses back from people that are teens, 20 years old. You shouldn't be experiencing these things at those ages, right? So it was really very telling on, that there was a lot of things going on. So average age is 27 and a half. For an example, ear infections as an adult was 147 times higher for individuals with FASD. 147 times higher than general population. Things like hearing loss as a child for individuals with FASD was 73 times higher than general population. Something like early onset dementia, that's defined as 64 years of age, I believe it is what the definition for early onset dementia is. We had people in their 30s reporting having early onset dementia. And so with the numbers we got there, it was 104 times higher for individuals with FASD to get early onset dementia. We had women reporting going through or had gone fully through menopause in their 20s. There was one colleague that I had, and she talked about, here she was a teenager going to her girlfriend's house, and they're all sitting around talking about boys and reading magazines and doing all those things, and she was having hot sweats because she is starting to go through menopause. So looking at these things, it really makes you think that there's something more going on. When we think about the fact that we know alcohol intake during the pregnancy affects the brain and the development of the brain, does it not make sense that it would also affect the development of the tissues, the organs, the joints, right? The alcohol doesn't simply just go in the fetus and go, excuse me, bones and tissues and joints. I'm just going to work my way up to the brain. No, it's obviously affecting those things. So it was almost like our brain development is impacted and may be developing at a slower rate, but our bodies are also impacted and they seem to be deteriorating at a faster rate, right? And this was something that we're finding was very, very common. So when we had over 500 people responding to this survey, right? And so it really gave a large example that we could use. And by doing this, we're able to kind of realize, and we're able to go with, it'd been said years ago, but not really always looked at, seeing and understand FASD as a whole body diagnosis. Okay? So when I talked about opening avenues to have these discussions, I think that this is one of the avenues that we can look at is healthcare, right? When we look at where FASD falls, and I'll just use from our examples of BC, but I think it's pretty much all over. What area does someone with an FASD diagnosis fall under for supports? We had a mother say that she called the brain injury clinic, said, I'm just wondering what support you guys offer for my child who has FASD. And they said, why would we support that? We're brain injury. And they're like, the mom was like, yeah, they have FASD. It's brain injury. And they're like, oh, no, we don't, that's not us here, right? And then you look at when there's other supports for other diagnoses, and not only is there a number of supports in place, but there's also a lot of financial support offered or ways to accommodate accessing those things for the child that needs them. A mother in our report said how her son's cousin had a weighted blanket and that they were able to access it through the services that they were getting because of his autism diagnosis. When this mother applied to the same agency saying, I would like to also get my son a weighted blanket, he has diagnosis of FASD, she was denied because no, we don't do that. We don't support people with FASD. We're just, helping these people with this disability and stuff. And it was really hard. We had one other mother who in our survey said that her daughter got a dual diagnosis of FASD and autism. And she said she felt so bad and she was in tears when she was sharing this because she said, I feel like I'm turning my back on the FASD community by accessing the supports that she can get through her autism diagnosis. The reason that we don't get the funding, we don't get the support, is because the conversation out there is, well, mother just didn't drink, right? It's not that simple. As we saw those stats in the beginning, 50% of people are having unplanned pregnancies, right? So it's not something they're doing on purpose to hurt their child. So when we look at FASD as a whole body diagnosis, one of the things that we got to look at, and one of the reasons we did this survey was to say that we want the parents and caregivers to take their 12-year-old to the doctor and say, can we look at osteoarthritis? It's not just always having growing pains or, he runs around a lot. It's, like for me, my dad would come pick me up because I go bike riding and then I'd call him and I'm like, I'm too tired to come all the way back home and my knees hurt. And he'd be like, okay, I'll pick you up. And so he picks me and my bike up and we didn't think anything more of it. But I was fortunate enough to have parents that just kind of did those things where sometimes somebody might be like, you know what, you biked all the way out there, you can bike back, you're just being lazy, right? But at the same time too, how many people are going to stop and go, I wonder if this could be arthritis? We don't, right? And so I've been dealing with those things for years while I'll be in waiting rooms and there's these ladies that are in their 70s or so and they're like, it just takes me a good half hour of sitting up and stretching and moving around to get going for the day. And You know, oh, it's just my arthritis in my knees and my ankles is just killing me. You know, and here I am, say 25, and I want to be like, oh, I know, I've had it for at least 12 years, and some days I can barely even get out of bed. And but I know if I say that, they're gonna look at me like, yeah, okay, kid, sure. Right? We don't realize that, you know, we need to look at this as a health issue that can impact children at any ages, right? So we did the survey. Now, one of the things that we did was we talked about executive functioning. And the reason we asked questions about this was because when you look at these numbers here, problems with short-term memory, 81.5% individuals with FASD that filled out the survey had problems with short-term memory. 67.3% had problems with long-term memory. 87.4% said that they had problems paying attention. Now, there's no stats for general public for this, so we couldn't compare it. But as you can see here, how high these numbers are. So why is this important when we're looking at FASD as a whole body diagnosis? Because when you go into the doctor and they say, okay, so what did you need to get checked? And you have to remember, especially if there's more than one or two things that you're going to talk to the doctor about. Then the doctor says, okay, yeah, all right, I'll write you up a prescription, and then you got to go get this blood test done and go to the front desk and book an appointment for 2 weeks from now. If you struggle with short-term memory, how do you remember to do all those steps? If you struggle with long-term memory, how do you remember that you're supposed to go to an appointment in 2 weeks to get the x-ray done? And you need to get the x-ray done so that they can submit it and send it back because you have a doctor's appointment in 4 weeks. It's these things that can really impact your health. I've had times where I've asked for somebody to go in with me and the doctor said, no, it's just going to be a quick little thing. You don't need anybody, right? Because I looked like a quote unquote normal, neurotypical person that should be able to understand these things that the doctor's saying. But developmentally, it's something that I struggled with. Right? Understanding that when we did these stats and found 2 to over 180% times higher than general population, the 500 plus people that we got the responses back from were people who either had supported type of living, were with family, or had an agency that they were connected to. These were people that were able to do the paperwork. What do you think the numbers would have been if we were able to access people that are not supported, that are maybe homeless? What about the people that are in jails? What do you think the numbers would have been if we were able to connect with them, right? So understanding that we need to look at FASD as a whole body diagnosis not only allows us to have another avenue to have that conversation of what FASD is, but also if it could help open another avenue for supports and funding and, you know, just overall understanding and support of FASD, that's what we need to do, right? We need to normalize it, we need to understand it and see it and support it, just like we do all other disabilities. So, to go a little bit over time, but I have FASD, so my time management skills is not my fault. I'm just kidding. But I'm going to kind of leave it there. Hopefully, I was able to share some information with you. There's a lot of information in a short amount of time, but yeah, hopefully it helped you see things a little bit different. Pass it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Myles. That was great. I'd like to just formally introduce our other panel members, but first we have a slide coming up. We are having a little bit of a technical difficulty with our Q&A function this afternoon. So for our panel discussion, we are going to ask that you please submit your questions by email We have two people who will be helping filter through questions this afternoon. We have Courtney Farrow-Lawrence and Megan Blunt. Their emails are up on the slide that you're seeing on screen. If you can email your question to either Courtney or Megan, and we will read those aloud to the panel this afternoon. Again, please include in your question if you have a specific presenter that you would like me to direct your question to. So joining Myles this afternoon on our panel, we have Dr. Alvin Lowe, who's the medical lead in our FASD clinic here at Surrey Place. We have Shirley McMillan. Shirley has her doctorate in learning disabilities nursing and is Canada's first certified developmental disability nurse. She works in our adult services at Surrey Place and with our adult FASD team. We have Kate, who is an adoptive parent of children impacted by FASD and has fostered many other children with FASD as well. She works with other parents, providing support and opportunities to understand their children and the FASD diagnosis more holistically. We're so thankful to have each of them here with us today. They'll do amazing work providing leadership and mentorship to our communities. And so they're going to be sharing their experience and practice during our panel discussion. So again, please submit your questions via email and we will have those coming through.
I'll leave this for a few more seconds so everybody can write the or get your email window open and just pop them in. And we'll start our panel shortly. Thank you, everybody. Once again, thank you for your patience and your time. Let me introduce you to one of our panelists, Dr. Alvin. Thank you so much, and you are live.
Thank you, and Myles, I really appreciate the research efforts that you and your friends took. Having that courage to start asking questions, and I think the response to your survey was amazing. I think if doctors sent out that survey, no one would really answer our survey questions, but I think you guys are part of that group. So I think people really related to the fact that you guys were reaching out, and it was amazing the number of people I think that responded. So as a developmental pediatrician, we've always been taught about FASD. It's mostly the brain, mental health, and so I think your research really helps us to open our eyes to something that, as you said, makes a lot of sense. That alcohol, is a teratogen. It destroys cells, and so it makes sense, right, that other systems might be affected, in different ways. So, I was trying to look up the literature for any other studies that people have done, like kind of in the same area. And I found one that someone published in 2020 in the Journal of Developmental Origins of Health and Disease. And they did a similar survey. They tried to target a median age of, I think, children who were 12. So they were targeting caregivers to report, on their children, which may not be as, maybe different from the study that you did, because then adults are reporting themselves, how they're feeling and their own diagnosis. Some of these children may not have been diagnosed yet, with some conditions, but they also found a higher prevalence of different groups of conditions, whether it was eye conditions, about 44%, prevalent asthma, which I think your study was also reporting was like 35%, heart conditions, 34%, and skin conditions, 27%. So yeah, they made similar comments, so I think there's more and more evidence for this, and it really, I think, should push caregivers as well as physicians, healthcare, practitioners to always think, oh, could there be a health issue underlying this maybe behavior of not wanting to ride their bike home, not wanting to walk, getting tired or things like that, and just really having that level of suspicion to dig a little bit deeper.
Does anybody want to continue the conversation with Dr. Alvin?
I would just say that it is really something that we want to be able to have the health community involved in and understanding, because exactly what you're saying there, that it's people don't think FASD is a whole body diagnosis, so they don't, when I'm with a doctor and they go, oh, is there anything else you need to know? I go, yeah, and I also have FASD. It's not like, oh, okay, so how does that impact your health? That's never something that's asked, right? And when you even talk to pre-med students, how much information did you get about FASD in your textbooks and schooling? It's, oh, there's the 3 facial features and the brains develop differently, right? So it's very little information, when in actuality there's so much involved when it comes to FASD that we need to collaborate so that we can educate more people in society and more professionals as well, right? So, yeah.
Thank you, Myles. And it looks we have a question, Sarah.
Yes, we do. So this question is for Myles. I'm a new organization. What services would you say are top priority after a diagnosis?
Good question. I think that offering supports and offering for a way for the individual who gets the diagnosis to understand it. My dream would be to be able to have an individual with FASD to be able to kind of walk through that journey with the individuals who are getting their diagnoses. So they're, so say I'm with someone that's going to go get their assessment done in a couple of weeks. Maybe I go with them to the office beforehand and kind of introduce them to, these are the people you're going to meet that day, and this is a little bit about what they're going to do. This is what the environment looks like. After we're done, and maybe not right afterwards, but at some point, sit down with that individual and talk about what the results meant. Right? So when they're getting the diagnosis done and they're having to do all this testing, and then at the end of it, there's a meeting where other people are sitting at the table, say teachers and parents and whoever else, and they're hearing that, oh, his ability to process information, it will take him longer, and then the parents or the individuals given all the information and the results, but with the language that it has in it, it may be very difficult to understand. And so they're walking away going, what we thought was going to give us these answers and what we are so excited about has, sent us off with what now we're more worried about things, right? And, we don't understand what's going on. So to be able to have somebody to sit down with that individual and go, okay, so if we think about processing and give that example that I did with that slide, right? Or if we think about sensory issues, imagine having like glasses that are flickering and having these gloves that don't fit right and having these weird smells and all that, right? Being able to talk about what the diagnosis is for that individual to normalize it is really what needs to happen, because if it's my diagnosis, I need to understand it. Right? We hear that so often. We actually did in one of the surveys that 97%, and I believe this was in a survey that we just released that had over 400 people with FASD do the survey, 97% of those 400 plus people believe that people don't understand their diagnosis. 97%, that is huge, right? And, it's even themselves understanding what their diagnosis is, right? So I think offering those supports, listening to the individual about, because like I said, it was always, oh, this is what they need to do, this is what they should do differently. But then when we were able to start participating in conferences and collaborating on different projects and saying, okay, this is actually what we need and how it actually works, right? So collaborating with the individuals and bringing supports for them that will help them grow, right? So yeah, being involved in those things is huge.
Can I add something too?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I really think peer support for individuals with FASD and for their caregivers, family, friends, to help understand. I think that it helps to normalize their experiences and stops being seen as other when you really understand, oh, that, you know, I need to not take that personally. I need to understand that that's just part of who they are, right? And I've really seen that as a parent. There are so many misconceptions and stereotypes out there about FASD. There's so many limits that are assumed to be the reality for people with FASD. And so for parents and friends and caregivers and extended family to see other people's stories and how they've navigated things, to know the champions in the community who really get it, you know, whether that's a service or a physician or somebody with lived experience who's older and kind of gives back to the community, much like Myles. I think brings a lot of hope. I think brings better understanding. And those two things have a huge impact, I think, on outcomes for children and youth with FASD. And of course, you know, to Myles' really good point about, you know, sharing about the mom who said, you know, the kind of guilt over in the autism community, you're able to access this, but in the FASD community or not. I really noticed the difference for kids with FASD. I've been able to find far more peer supports for other diagnoses other than FASD, and yet what they really want is to connect with other kids who have FASD. So I would say anything that can bring people together and to help build a stronger community and to help share experiences and connection is absolutely beneficial.
I think it's so key that because when you get to a group and you find you're not the only one, it is so amazing. And you can have the best mom and dad in the world that's told you 1 + 1 = 2. And, you know, it's been 19, 20 years of telling this kid this. And, you know, they go to this FASD group. And because I have FASD and I tell them, did you know 1 + 1 = 2? You know, now they're going home and going, guess what, mom and dad? Guess what I learned? Myles said that 1 + 1 = 2. And it's because I have FASD that they're like, yes, me too. I'm not the only one, right? And it's so amazing because you can have those conversations about sometimes it's hard to remember things. Oh, I know. Or smells are really difficult. I know, right? And it's allowing that peer relationship to happen, but also just as important, having those peer support groups for parents and not just have a support group for parents with kids with disabilities, because that doesn't work when it comes to FASD. Again, it's, well, just tell the kid behave or whatever, right? The support group needs to be parents specifically with and supporting children with FASD.
We've had a couple of questions come through for the group just around having conversations with your doctor, having resources to share when you're coming into that medical appointment. Do any of our panelists want to speak to that? How to have those conversations and how to find resources to share?
I can take a shot at it as the token physician here today, and thinking what it's like, for myself and my colleagues when patients come in, and sometimes they know more than you do because they read a lot around their, specific kind of problem. And I think, always being respectful with the physicians and just talking about, this behavior that's unusual, that this tends to happen. My child has lots of energy, but he seems to be tired. And I think parents should probably or caregivers be the experts about pain or discomfort for their child, because they will know that better than any health professional. And so for them, I think they need to think, well, how can I ask my child if something's really hurting? Is it painful? How painful is it? And to try to get that information, if they can communicate that, because then that's something that you can communicate to the doctor that, I think my child is really in pain. It's, not just like a behavior. I think he's really in discomfort because even though he loves, this activity, after he does a bit of it, he just is complaining a lot. He can't do it anymore. So I do think that's a helpful part for a physician, just to know that it's not just the behavior, but there's a suspicion of pain or discomfort, because then it makes more sense for us to do testing. And then I think the other thing parents can think about is they can always ask the parents, oh, we've heard the research, here's the article, that we found, and it, there's a higher, prevalence, these conditions, could he have something like the osteoarthritis? Would there be any like easy things we can do to treat, to see if he might get better? Because maybe if you try like, Advil for a few days, like you might see, oh, he makes a big difference versus when he's not. So I think there's things that don't cost a lot, for the doctor or for the health system that, if it's a hypothesis, it's good to talk about it with them. Hopefully they're open-minded, to be able to say, yeah, that's possible, given this kind of research, it's not too bad to try to, try a few days of taking Advil, if we think it's the arthritis. So conversations like that, I think, could be helpful.
Great. Anybody else want to speak to that one?
Sure. So I can do it from the adult perspective. And because I do the 18 and up, I think it's best to help parents and give them the language to speak with physicians and to go prepared. And that's the one thing that we try in our clinic, is to get consent to be able to share the report with the family physician, because that's generally or the healthcare provider, and then engage with that healthcare provider a few weeks later and come with prepared, rather than, because I even know myself, if I go to an appointment, I think I have 7 questions going in and I forget at least 3 of them or more. So if we write it down, because then that helps, especially as an adult, if they're going to the appointments on their own, to be really prepared and to take information to the family physician as well, especially when we know there's limited in their medical curriculum to speak to FASD through the whole lifespan, not just, children or adults, but the entire lifespan, looking at that, and give them reliable research, so you're not just pulling something off the internet. But I think, and we can even practice with the person that has FASD, to ask the questions and how to ask them, and to be confident in asking them and hopefully getting an answer back. So if that sort of adds to the adult piece of it.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. I think certainly there's advocacy to help. It's so good to remember that people, learn a lot in medical school, of which FASD is a small part, of course, except for people who specialize in it. I think I had to, as a parent, begin to have the confidence to not just know my child deserved better, but to actually make a decision to leave a clinic that was not able to meet my kids' needs. And that was very hard to do. I felt, there's a power imbalance. I felt very grateful for all that they had done. But, and it's I won't go into names, but it's a well-respected place. But language started coming like, these kids don't really benefit from a family. There's not much you can do. It's all going to fall apart. And I could see that things were starting to be overlooked, not because they're not good people, but I felt that the lens, it was almost like once the FASD lens was open, it was the only lens through which they saw my child, but not in a helpful way, like Myles is talking about with, what do they need and all those things, in a almost like, they're there, we're so sorry this happened. And it reminded me a lot of when we got our diagnosis. When we got the diagnosis for 2 out of 3, it was, there's nothing for you out there. This is going to be a hard life. This is the exact words. Good luck. My kids are thriving. That's not to say that every day they thrive. That's not to say in every situation they thrive. That is to say that we shift, move, have do-overs, don't do long-term consequences that don't meet their needs or don't, help them to make those links. And I haven't had to do a lot of growing and learning. And I think that was the key. We ended up switching thanks to our family doctor, and I realized there's incredible privilege in being able to find physicians. So I just want to say to anybody listening who can't, find a new family doctor or a new pediatrician that, I know that that's very, very hard in many, many communities. But we ended up switching, and the difference to my children's health was immediate. Suddenly somebody was willing to follow up on those things that I've been mentioning appointment after appointment, but was seen as, kids with FASD, it all stems from behavior. And actually there was things that they needed help with, related to hearing, related to one of their spinal cords. There was actual things. And so to me, I would say, as a parent, and I know Dr. Lowe acknowledged this too, often you might not have the medical training, but you are well versed in the things that are impacting your children. So I guess having the confidence to know what your kids deserve and what their needs are, and to be able to express that, and that it's okay to take an alternative path. Yeah, it really is.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Kate. We have had a couple of questions come in around sleep. So people are seeing that sleep is a huge issue for people with FASD. Any updates on research in sleep and FASD?
Yeah, I was just looking up, seeing what is really current, and there've been a study published in 2021 where people did a lot of sleep questionnaires in a group, and they compared them to a control group. And then when people had abnormalities, they went on to do sleep studies, which are kind of like the gold standard of collecting lots of good information about how deep is the sleep, are they stopping breathing at certain points in time. And they did find that there was a significant increase in like sleep difficulties, sleep problems, and then abnormalities with some of the sleep testing that they did, in like 20 of the children with FASD. They were often in the younger children as opposed to the ones that were a bit older. So they were saying that, we probably need to do more research to understand, what we should do. But it is, the challenge for families as well. My child's not sleeping tonight, and what am I going to do tonight, for him to help his sleep? And I think that's a challenge, but it could be, if it's a recurrent problem, to ask your primary care doctor, whether it's a pediatrician or family doctor, for referral to a sleep clinic, because of findings like this, where people are finding a lot more abnormalities with the control of sleep, and just maybe having more awakenings and not having a good quality of sleep. I don't know whether others want to add to that.
With just with our study, we asked about problems falling asleep, and 70% of the individuals said that they had problems falling asleep. 57.6% said they had problems staying asleep. Now, the interesting thing that we have to understand about sleep is also the same thing with pain. I did not know until my 30s that I didn't actually sleep. Like my partner was like, you're constantly moving, and sometimes you'll sleep with your legs straight up in the air, and I'm like, what? I can't even do that when I'm awake. But they're like, you don't stop being and stuff like that. But just like my hunger cues weren't very much there, so I didn't know I was hungry. And same with the pain tolerance, it's different for me than other people. Sleep, it's my normal. Nobody came up and said, no, this is what it feels like to actually get 6 to 8 hours of sleep. So if you're having heightened sensory issues and you're in a system in your body that doesn't ever come to rest, there's no off switch. Just because you have FASD, you can't turn off the way that the blanket feels, the pillow feels, the way the room smells, all of those things, and your own body system constantly moving. There's no off switch. So what my normal is, even though it may not be other people's normal, that's been my normal for so long. I didn't understand until I was able to work with a physician and get some medical support to help with sleeping. And I had like a 6 to 8 hour sleep, and I was like, my goodness, that's what this feels like. But I was so excited and happy because I'm like, oh my goodness, I can actually have sleep now. But I was 30 something, and I was like, wow, that's another sense of loss. I lost my education and my opportunities because I wasn't even getting the sleep I needed, right? You need that sleep to recharge your body, right? Just like a battery, right? You got to recharge it. And so for all those years, I didn't sleep, but I was supposed to get up, and I had all the expectations on me that everyone else around me had who had slept, right? So it's so important to follow sleep, so important to find out how you can help the individual sleeping. There's a lot of great little apps and stuff now where you can track how much REM sleep they're getting and things like that, and doing that at a much younger age. But then also too, if there haven't been supports in place and say they're now coming across spending time, say with Shirley, that conversation also happening, going, okay, what about your sleep? What does that look like, right? And how's that playing a role in your life? Because if no one else has ever asked, they might be 25 years old and think, oh, I just sleep like everybody, right? So sleep is a huge, huge struggle when it comes to FASD, and one of those things that can really make a big difference if properly supported.
One of the things I really had to learn is that kids and youth with FASD are not a homogenous group, right? There's a huge amount of diversity. And so, you know, I have two in particular who are like chalk and cheese with sleep. And I really had to learn that the only way to wind down is a very early bedtime. So not focusing on age, right? Because that makes them feel like, well, I'm too old to go to bed at that time, but focusing on need and the strengths, how wonderful it is you're able to get up early and start the day, you know, so early and get they need to go to bed 2.5 hours earlier. That was a huge learning for me. And, you know, Myles, to your really great research, I was thinking there's so many sensory distractions to sleep for people with FASD, like even just the way you talked about pain, right? Toileting, night terrors, all of those things, I think I've certainly learned compared to my friends, kids of, you know, similar chronological ages, we still navigate lots of things to do with sleep that many people say goodbye to at a much younger stage. And so it's kind of giving them the tools, right? You know, one really struggles to unwind. So what do? One needs a body pillow. One needs a shower before bed. You know, one is very anxious about the next day, so needs to see that the reminders are all written there. One needs music to sleep. And it's really acknowledging that we need to let go of what we think normal should be and help them figure out what's normal and healthy for them and what makes them feel good.
I even know some people where there's, you know, a couple of the kids in the family will take like melatonin and have their little sleep schedule. And then there's another one who goes and has a coffee before bed. Because for her system, that actually calms her down. So literally right before she's going to go to bed and start a routine, she'll put on a coffee and have a coffee, right? And so again, it's that great example of how we're all different, right?
Yeah.
And so what works for one isn't necessarily going to work for another, right? But also being able to have those conversations to say, okay, what would work for you, or how do you think we could do this, right? So
yeah.
We've had a bit of a follow-on question coming in as well. You know, you guys spoke to how much sleep impacts everything else. Ideas, suggestions, supports for educators who are then trying to work with kids the next day who haven't had that quality sleep. If anyone has suggestions to speak to that.
We've had to do that, navigate that. So a few things I've found. So for my child who really needs to sleep longer because they have a much harder time falling asleep, we get everything ready the night before so that it's a much simpler pared down routine in the morning to help be able to sleep as long as possible before needing to get ready for school. That's been a really big help. It kind of gave them an extra half hour, which made a big difference in their lives. We have had a very positive experience with school. I understand that not everybody does, and we have not always had a very positive experience with school. But I have found things like as the kids get older, school has been very, very open. I know of another youth with FASD where school has agreed for them to do the morning class online and the afternoon class in person. In terms of my kids, they found a quiet space at lunchtime for one of them so that they could have a rest and be ready for the next class, which was really helpful. Also, I recognize, again, there's immense privilege depending on where you live. In some cities, you have a choice of schools. In our area, there are schools that start at 7:15 in the morning, and there are schools that start at 9:30 in the morning. So you can imagine which one for my kids I would choose. again, recognizing there's privilege there. But I have also found that the vast majority of educators really, really want to do what they can to help your kids succeed. And I have found that going in every September as a parent, I run a session for all of my kids' teachers, and usually somebody from guidance and administration comes as well, and talk about FASD and the ways it impacts the kids and strategies that can be used to help them be successful. And, you know, it's a little overwhelming at first and a bit intimidating, but it has always, always led to so much better understanding. And, you know, I'm also, you know, I know that parents have to make these hard decisions. I also can see when my kids have reached a point where they really need a break. And so it's things like sometimes it's really, you know, as a parent, you pile on at the weekend, right? And my kids can't do that because they struggle then Monday to Friday. So really figuring out what do they need. And we use the spoon theory in our house to try and make it not seem like someone's a failure. And I don't know if people know the spoon theory, but that's that we all have a certain number of spoons, but our tasks might take one person 5 spoons, another person 2 spoons. They don't have as much spoons left or as much energy left. And that's really helped reduce any shame. You know, when sometimes my kids see that some of their peers are able to do competitive this, competitive that, and still get A's at school and still this, and that's just not their reality, and that's okay.
I think it's also understanding that when you're missing that lack of sleep, I know for me, I could do the day if I started at 11:30, but by 11:30, I've already been through enough classes and been seen as not listening, not paying attention, not caring, not trying, that by 11:30, I'm already feeling low on myself. And, you know, and then we got a couple more classes, and then I got to go home and got to deal with all this other stuff, right? So it's that making a safe place and understanding the impact that even as teachers, just think about simply the minutes, hours, days, months, and years individuals are in school. You know, we downplay the impact that school can have. And so if all of those minutes, months, times, years are spent where I'm feeling like I'm a failure and I'm not good enough because everyone's pointing out what I'm doing wrong and very few to no one's pointing out what I'm doing right, first off, why would I want to keep going there when I become a teenager and I can maybe make that choice? But second off is understanding that impact you have. Maybe I'm not going to go across the stage and get a diploma, but it doesn't mean that I can't build a relationship with a teacher, and that makes me feel good and makes me want to continue to come back to school, right? So understanding where the strengths for the child is, what's going to work for the child. One of the things that we hear all the time is, oh, I remember my teacher would put me out in the hallway, or my teacher put me in the coat room. And then quite often that's followed up with, and I really like that actually. And it's like, this was being used as a punishment, you know, to be like, well, then you go sit in the hallway or you go sit in the coat room. But what people didn't understand was you just removed all that sensory overload from that individual. And now they're actually being able to sit and work at a pace that works for them, right? So what was supposed to be this punishment almost was helpful, right? And so being able to even have the opportunity to say to the teacher, actually, I like it in the coat room. Can I go do work there? Or can I actually have a desk outside and that's okay? So I think it's really important to have those relationships with the teachers so that you can, you know, say, hey, this is what's going on, or even just be able to say, hey, so-and-so didn't get much sleep this weekend. It was really chaotic. There's a lot going on. So just a heads up, you know, be there, but he might just need a little bit more patience today. So, yeah.
That's great. We have a question coming in around potty training, that some people are saying this is an issue. If you guys have any thoughts on, you know, is this a common issue for kids with FASD? Are there medical issues that need to be looked into or need to be checked out that are going to be impacting on potty training? I see Kate, you're nodding. Do you want to start us off?
I have so much to say. I'm trying to think what prioritize. It is. I mean, I've navigated parenting 3 kids, and while with FASD, and while I would say there's a lot of, as I said, diversity in experience and not a homogenous group, this is something that I think that is common. I do think it's important to do medical tests and check. Certainly with my kids and with other children I've cared for with FASD, a big challenge to potty training kind of at the later age was related to constipation. Right. And I can see people nodding because that's often something we don't necessarily think is a challenge. And of course, I don't know how old this child is. So if they're 2, that may be less of an issue, but could still be an issue. But that was really, really challenging. So, maybe Dr. Lowe can better describe it, or Shirley can, but, if you're constipated and it's pressing on your bladder, then, both having enough time when you feel you need to go to be able to plan to go and then go, but also things like nighttime wetting were increased, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, getting on a really good routine, working with a urologist, getting on a really good routine that was built around things that worked for my child that needed that extra support was really helpful. And in the end, that probably is going to be a lifelong thing. We're now 10 years in, and still that's a bit of a struggle. So we continue with that kind of constipation routine with meds that have been prescribed, and that's helpful. I think too, I've always found for my kids that reading a book that's built on neurotypical milestones can sometimes limit you. And limit you in ways that I think create unfair expectations or unrealistic expectations, or just not the timeline that our kids need. I feel like my kids meet many, many milestones, but in a different time frame. And so sometimes just being able to kind of shift to this might take quite a while. And so we're going to continue to work on it. We're not going to feel defeated, but we're also going to have really realistic expectations, and also look at the things that might be behind the struggles. So for one of my children that really struggled with toilet training, as they were able to become more verbal, was able to share that the sensory experience of going to the toilet was too much for them. So we started with things like, they particularly find music very calming. So having music in the bathroom, all those sorts of things, because I think we can never, ever separate, as Myles said at the beginning, and why we're here, that kind of whole body diagnoses, right? That whole body disability. And so doing things that kind of helped make everything gentler and be realistic and child-led really, really helped.
Yeah, I would agree, with Kate that constipation is a very common problem that, complicates toileting issues. So always something to try to monitor the bowel movements. And sensory issues and anxiety can contribute to difficulties, making it, not very fun for them to toilet. So it's a bit of an aversive experience. So you want to kind of change, the environment a bit, make it more supportive. And then sometimes, we've had some children where, it's good to be referred to like the urologist or the clinic that specializes in these difficulties, because they'll look for, these different issues that contribute. They might do different kinds of tests, right? See whether there's, difficulties with sensation, perceptions and control, of the muscles. Like, for example, I know that Sick Kids, has a clinic like that. So something like that, maybe worth thinking about.
Shirley, I don't know if you have anything you can share from an adult perspective. I suspect this is a lifelong challenge.
It certainly is, and constipation, it's everywhere, and it's every person, and it's not just someone with FASD, and that seems to be my first question that we always ask. And I also thought that we should bring up too, especially for adults, that in our primary care guidelines, the first thing is to rule out anything medical before you start putting such demands on a person that there's a problem, and we need to fix the medical problem first before we look at any behavior interventions. And everybody's an individual, and we have to find that that schedule and things that work and things that don't work, and not obviously put any shame on them for things aren't working out exactly as we wanted, but tomorrow's a new day.
Great. We had a question come in around hypersensitive vasovagal responses. So, children who might pass out momentarily if they're winded. Is this a common issue in FASD?
Like, I'll jump in and say that I haven't seen it too much or heard about it too much. It could be. I would think that if you're presenting, with that kind of syncope, passing out momentarily, it's definitely good to see your pediatrician, whether it's the FASD or whether there's other, reasons why you could be having that. I think it's good to look at that. But yeah, not as much from my experience.
Well, I think our whole theme today is, bring these issues up, right? Bring it up in your medical appointments. We've also had a question come in around, can there be a link between the lack of treatment of physical health issues and then, the aggression or dysregulation or attention issues that we see in FASD? So, how does the treatment of physical health really impact on those other, sometimes described as more behavioral kinds of presentations?
I think one of the things is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, no, you go ahead, Myles. No, I've learned so much from you. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say that sometimes it is, that can be the main factor, right? If you're not sleeping and, like I know for myself, there's days where I'm in a lot of pain and my body's like, okay, we're done, right? And so I fortunately have more control over my environment and what my day-to-day looks like. But when you're a child or a teenager, you may not have that much control to say, okay, I'm just going to relax today, or whatever it is, where you have to get up, you have to go here. And if I'm just in a lot of pain and really tired, that easily comes out as behavior. Like, we know that whether you have FASD or not, if you haven't got your sleep and maybe you didn't get your first coffee, it's like you might be a little snippy, right? But imagine what that's like when your body's just so tired and done, and it's like, okay, let's go here, let's go there, and and they're like, do we have to? And if I don't know how to express that I'm tired or that I'm sore, or even just to be able to say, can I have a break today? We don't have to go into details of why, but maybe when I feel this way, my parent, caregiver, whoever, can go, okay, if he's asking for a break today, it's because he's tired, right? So I think it's very, very common for those health issues to play out and be seen as behavior. And the interesting thing is, all of us, everybody, whether FASD or not, in our head, when we think behavior, we so quickly do think bad behavior. The thing is, it's not just it's a behavior, it's bad behavior, punishment, but it's a behavior. Okay, let's look at the behavior. Where's it coming from? Because those are our signals, right? Like, when you have a baby and they cry, it's okay, are they hungry? Are they tired? Do they need their diaper changed? We know, okay, what is this signal meaning, right? We're not going, stop behaving badly. You're a week old, come on. Like, but when we see adults displaying these behaviors, if we can have the mindset of, what is it that they're trying to show us? What else could actually be going on, right? And then I think that having that mindset can really help. So.
And further to that, Myles, as well, would be, it's not the person that's the problem. It's what's causing the behavior, and we really need to dig deep into it. And as clinicians, we all need to take the time to really get to know the person and find out the settings of when, any of the aggression and dysregulation, and I can't happen, and what has, happened just before. And we need to not just look at consequences, we really need to look at the person. And I can't tell you how many people I have seen in the clinic in the 5 years that I've been doing it that have been treated with ADHD earlier in their years, and they really have had no idea why they've done it. They just know that they're fidgety, they need to get up and move around, and the medication really didn't help. So we need to adjust that environment as well for not only the aggression, and certainly aggression can come from many reasons, and there can be many physical health reasons for it, and you know, constipation is only one of them. They also could have reflux, and that has affected their sleep during the night as well. So we really need to dig deep and get to know the person, because everybody's unique and an individual, and we can't just assume because one person has it, everybody has it.
Yeah, to add to what Myles and Shirley mentioned, you know, when we find that we identify and treat these disorders, like if you treat the constipation, you treat the reflux, or they have a dental problem and that gets, you know, discovered and found, then the behavior gets a lot better, you know, like straight away. So definitely we see it contributing significantly.
Thanks so much for sharing those. We just have a minute left. I wanted to take some time to just thank everyone, thank our audience for your wonderful questions, and to our panelists and to Myles for that, you know, really amazing to hear your personal experiences, and the work that you do advocating and researching is so valuable. We are going to be posting this on our website, so if you know someone who missed it, couldn't join us today, or if you want to rewatch, I know it's a lot to take in, that will be going live on our website, surreyplace.ca, as of Friday, October 1st. And also to check out our other offerings or connect with us through our website or social media. Lastly, our feedback today is your feedback to us about today is so important. You will be receiving a brief survey to the email that you used to register for the event, and we do ask, please fill it out and send us your feedback. Thank you so much again for joining us, and on behalf of everyone at Surrey Place, we wish you a great day.